Chapter 20. He saw the hills from the map sooner than he thought he should see them, but they were the right ones. He was sure of it. They rose steeply ahead and on either side, rounded but high, covered with trees. It was just about noon and the sun was beating down on him. He reached under the shelter and used the damp t-shirt to cool Derek again. "We're moving," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion, not believing it. "We're moving along now." And when he said it, he knew it was true. The raft was increasing in speed. Even as he watched, the speed seemed to pick up. "We're hauling," he started, then trailed off as it dawned on him. The contour lines being close together on the map meant that the banks steepened between the hills. If there were hills and steep banks, the river might drop, fall a bit. He reached for the briefcase to take another look at the map, but stopped with his hand halfway out. A sound. Some sound was there at first that he could not place. It was so soft, he could almost not hear it at all over the sounds of the birds. But there it was again, a hissing. What was it? No, it was lower than that. Not to be heard, but felt. A whooshing. Water. A water sound. A rumbling sound. The sound of water moving fast, dropping and falling. Falling water. A waterfall. They were headed for a waterfall. Chapter 21. There was no time left. The river had narrowed slightly, but now there was more of a drop and the speed had increased dramatically. They were dead in the middle of the river and Brian knew he had to get to shore, had to stop, but there was no time. Twice as fast as he could walk, the raft was fairly careening now. The sound was louder. If he tried to paddle for shore, he would succeed only in turning the raft sideways. He was not sure how he could get over a waterfall, if indeed he could at all, but he was fairly certain he did not want to try it with the raft sideways. If it went a long way over the waterfall, it would be harder to roll over. Sideways, and it would roll easily. The sound was a definite rumble now, and in seconds they wheeled around a bend and Brian could see it. God, it was a whisper. It was not a waterfall, but it might as well have been. The river moved between two large stone bluffs that formed the sides of the two hills Brian had seen on the map. The bluffs forced the river to a narrower width, deeper, and at the same time aimed it through some boulders that had split off either side and dropped in the middle. All of this had the effect of making a monstrous chute where the water fought and roared to get through, smashing around the rocks in huge sprays of white water. And the raft was aimed right down the middle of the chute. Things happened so fast after that. There was not a way he could prepare for it. The raft seemed to come alive, turn into a wild, crazy animal. The front end took the river, swung down and into the current, grabbed the madness of the water, and ran with it. Brian had just time to look down at Derek, just time to see that he was still tied to the raft securely, and they were into it. The raft bucked and tore at the water, slammed sideways. Brian tried to steer, using the paddle to swing the stern to the left and right, trying to avoid the boulders, but it was no use. The water owned the raft, owned Derek, owned him. In the roaring, piling thunder of the river, he had no control. They were flying. The logs of the raft reared out of the water on pressure ridges, slamming back down so hard it rattled his teeth. In the middle of the chute was a boulder, huge, gray, and wet with waves and spray, and the raft aimed directly at the center of it. He had time to scream, sound lost in the roar of water, and throw himself on Derek. The raft wheeled slightly to the left and struck the boulder. Brian thought for a part of a second that they had made it. Derek's body lurched beneath him and dropped back. The raft took the blow, flexed, gave, but held together. And Brian started one clear thought. We made it. Then it hit. There was an underwater boulder next to the giant in the middle of the river, hit him by a pressure wave. It lay sideways out and to the left, halfway to the left wall. The nose of the raft made it, carried over by the pressure ridge, hung for a second, then dropped, plummeted down. As it tipped forward, the rear of the raft cut down the water and came against the submerged ledge. Wonk. Brian heard it hit, felt the impact and the sound through his whole body. He grabbed, tried to hold on to the logs beneath Derek, but it was no use. The stern kicked off the ledge, slapped him up and away, clear of the raft, completely in the air. He hung for a split instant in midair, looking down on the raft, on Derek, and then he plunged down into the boiling, ripping water. Everything was madness. Frothy green bubbles, hissing, rolling water. He came up for a moment, saw the raft shooting away downstream carrying Derek, and he was down again, mashed down and tumbled by the pressure wave, smashed into the rocks on the bottom, and all he could think was that he had to stay alive, had to get up, get air, get back to the raft. But the wave was a great weight on him, a house on him. The world was on him, and he could not move up against it. He fought and clawed against the rock, broke his face free, then was driven down again, hammered into the bottom. Sideways. He'd have to work sideways. Smashed, buffeted, he dragged himself to the side beneath the pressure wave. It became stronger. He could not rise, could not get air. His lungs seemed about to burst, demanded that he breathe, even if it was water. He willed the urge away, down, but it grew worse. And just when he knew it was over, when he would have to let the water in, when he would die, just then he made the edge of the pressure wave at the side of the boulder. The current roared past the rock and took him like a chip, sucking him downstream. He brought his head clear for one tearing breath, opened and shook water out of his eyes long enough to see that the raft was gone, out of sight. Then he was driven back under, down to the bottom, smashing into boulders in a roaring green thunder, end over end until he knew nothing but the screaming need to breathe, to live, and then his head smashed into something explosively hard, and he thought nothing at all.